For 41 years, my life was ruled by other people's numbers, attendance sheets, pop quizzes, final exams, grade curves. I knew the sound of a student's pencil scratching a wrong answer before I even saw the paper. I could stand at the front of a classroom, glance over 30 shoulders, and spot the kid who had written 0.3 instead of 0.03 from 10 feet away. Check your decimal, I'd say, tapping the desk, and the student would sigh, erase, correct. They used to joke I had a built-in calculator where my heart should be. They weren't far off. My name is Walter Brand. I taught algebra and probability to teenagers who mostly didn't want to be there, in a public high school that smelled like floor cleaner and old sweat. I did it for 4 decades. I retired at 72 with a small pension, a drawer full of red pens, and a stack of plaques nobody asked to see. 5 years before I retired, my wife died. Cancer, the slow, mean kind. We'd planned to travel after I left the classroom, see the coast, maybe rent a small cottage somewhere foggy and quiet. Instead, I learned how quiet an empty apartment can be at 2 in the afternoon when you don't have anywhere to be and no one is waiting for you to get home. So I made myself a routine. Every morning I walked the same loop around the neighborhood, down to the strip of casinos that sat like giant, blinking mouths along the edge of the city. Not the glamorous Vegas ones you see in movies. I lived far enough away from the strip to avoid that circus. Mine were the locals' places, carpet that hadn't been replaced since the 90s, cheap coffee, penny slots lined up like tired soldiers. There was one casino I liked more than the others because they had a senior breakfast special, eggs, toast, and black coffee for $10. If you were over 65, they knocked $3 off. If you had their loyalty card, they knocked off another $2. I liked watching the cashier calculate the discounts. If she made a mistake, I felt it before the receipt printed. I never corrected her. In the classroom, that had been my job. Out here it wasn't, or so I told myself. That morning, the morning everything changed, I went through the routine like every other day. Walk, shuffle in, the familiar blast of cold, recycled air. The clatter of coins, fake now, all digital, but the sound effects persisted. The constant ding, 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 overlaying the low murmur of TVs and old men arguing about football. I went to the cafe counter, ordered the usual, slid my loyalty card across without thinking, and watched the girl at the register tap in the numbers. 10 for the breakfast, minus senior, minus card, that's, she muttered, brow furrowing slightly. She hit total. 541, the screen declared. That can't be right, I said automatically. It should be 550. She blinked up at me. Excuse me. 3 off for senior, 2 off for the card, I said. 10 minus 5 is 5. Tax on that is 35 cents, not 41, unless the rate changed overnight. Did it? She stared at the screen. It's what the system says, she said finally. I almost smiled. There it was, the sentence that had followed me my whole career. But the answer key says, but the calculator says, but the computer says. I dug a crumpled receipt out of my pocket from 2 days earlier. Here, I said, smoothing it. Same thing, $5, 35 cents tax. She compared them, looked back at the screen. She said. Behind me, someone shifted impatiently. A manager noticed, swooped in, tapped a code into the register. Override it, he said. Give him the discount. She did. The screen obediently changed. 535, she said. Closer, I muttered. The manager gave me a tight smile. Everything square now, sir? He asked. Close enough, I said. Thank you. I took my tray and moved to my usual table near the cashier cage, the place where the sound of money moving in and out of the casino was loudest. It was a habit I hadn't thought about much. I liked watching the movement, the counting, order in the chaos. But that morning, something about the breakfast receipt stuck in my mind. The computer had been wrong, not dramatically, 6 cents, an error so small, 99 out of 100 customers wouldn't notice, and the 100th would shrug and pay. It had taken a 72-year-old retired math teacher with nothing better to do to catch it. I ate my eggs, sipped my coffee, and watched. The cashier cage was a glass-fronted island in the center of the casino floor. Behind the glass, 3 employees rotated through tasks, counting chips, stacking them in plastic trays, handing out cash, taking deposits, answering the occasional question from someone who had lost track of their own money. To most people, it was just part of the background. To me, it was a live-action math problem. I watched one of the cashiers, a young man with buzzed hair, take a full tray of green $25 chips from a security guard, set it on the counter, and start counting. He tapped them in piles of 20, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. He called out the total, 2,000, and slid the tray onto a scale built into the counter. The number on the scale's small digital display flicked, then settled. The cashier glanced at it, pressed a button on his keyboard, and I saw a number flash up on the computer monitor facing him. He nodded, scribbled something on a log sheet, moved on. It was like watching my students rush through a problem and accept whatever answer the calculator gave them, whether it made sense or not. I watched another tray come in, red $5 chips this time. Same process. Count, call out, place on scale, glance at digital number, type, move on. After a while, I started to notice something odd. Not in the way they counted. That was straightforward enough. In the way the numbers on the little screen flickered. Sometimes, for a fraction of a second, I saw an extra digit, a decimal, before the system rounded it away. 3,125.75, it might say, then snapped to 3125 series as the total was logged. Or 550 becoming 540 euros. Tiny fractions, halves, quarters, bits of value shaved off by a rounding algorithm that had been set, I assumed, to avoid dealing with cents and chip totals. The chips themselves didn't do decimals. They were 5, 25, 100, 500, and so on. But the weight scale, that was a different story. Weight doesn't care about denominations. It cares about grams. If a chip was slightly worn, slightly dirty, slightly off, the weight would reflect that, and the software, in turn, would calculate a fractional chip. Then round it, usually down. The difference was tiny, $5 here, 10 there. Less than the amount they tried to overcharge me for breakfast. But as I watched tray after tray being counted, weighed, rounded, logged, I felt that old itch at the back of my brain. The one that said, something doesn't add up. I took out the small notebook I carried in my jacket pocket, a habit from teaching days, and started writing. Time, tray type, visible weight reading, rounded log. I told myself it was just to satisfy my curiosity. The same lie I used to tell myself when I stayed up grading until midnight, fixing commas no one would ever thank me for. I went back the next day, not because I liked their eggs that much, because I couldn't stop thinking about that flicker on the scale. I took the same table near the cage, bought the same breakfast, and watched, and wrote. The more I recorded, the clearer the pattern became. If a tray's weight came in slightly above a whole chip equivalent, say 100.25 chips worth of weight, the software rounded it to 100. If it landed slightly below, 99.75, it also rounded to 100. It was using conventional rounding to the nearest whole number. On paper, that made sense. In practice, in a chaotic environment where chips came in slightly scuffed, slightly chipped, occasionally mixing denominations in a hurry, the rounding skewed, not evenly, downward. Here's the thing you learn when you grade enough multiple-choice tests. Little biases in systems add up. If a test has 4 options per question and you design it poorly, a smart student can often eliminate 1 or 2 answers outright. Suddenly, the odds aren't 25% per guess. They're higher. Here, the casino system was guessing wrong just enough to matter. Over the course of an hour, the discrepancies were negligible. Over the course of a shift, dozens of trays being counted, recounted, moved, reweighed, logged, the fractional chips vanished into a vague fog called rounding. The real world kept one exact number of chips on the floor. The computer believed, with perfect confidence, that there were more, usually only by a few chips worth. But as I watched the dance between reality and the digital log, a terrifyingly simple thought formed in my mind. If the system believed there were, say, 10,000 chips worth of value in circulation, but there were only 9,900. And 90? Those extra 10 chips existed only as numbers in a database. And if someone took physical chips out of the system, while the rounding error still covered the gap, the logs would still match. It would look like nothing was missing. In the classroom, I would have circled that on the board and written, in red, vulnerability. The next week, I started treating the casino the way I used to treat a new textbook. Study the table of contents. Find the holes. Look for where the author had gotten tired. I learned the shifts. Morning, when the old regulars came with pocketfuls of small bills. Afternoon, when tourists wandered in half bored and half hopeful. Night, when the volume went up and sometimes so did the voices. I watched which cashiers were meticulous and which ones rushed. I watched which floor managers double-checked the trays and which ones signed off without looking. I watched the chip runners, the employees who wheeled carts of trays back and forth between tables, the cage and the back-of-house storage. I noticed something odd there, too. There was a particular bottleneck in the system. Trays would come from the tables, be counted at the cage, logged, then stacked on what they called the temporary storage racks, open shelving units just inside a half door behind the cage, where they sat for anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes before being wheeled back out to the floor or into the vault. Those racks were in a strange limbo, technically secured because they were behind the cage's half door and within the camera's view. In practice, during busy periods, that area became a blur of motion, especially during shift changes. Chip runner A would drop off 3 trays. Chip runner B would grab 2. A supervisor would step in, take a tray to check a table. Someone would answer a phone. Someone else would bring in new trays from the vault. The logs were clear on paper. Each tray had a code, each movement had a line in the system. But in the physical world, I saw a 2-minute window, again and again, where trays sat unattended on the racks while everyone assumed someone else was watching. I started timing those windows. I started noting which racks were most neglected. I started paying attention to how often chips were adjusted after an initial count. It was like being in teacher mode again, except this time the school was a casino, the students were employees, and the mistakes weren't costing anyone a letter grade. They were costing millions. The first time I stole a chip, my hands shook for an hour afterward. It was a stupid move, the kind of impulsive act I had lectured my students against 1,000 times. Don't test a theory with variables you don't understand, I'd say. Then I did exactly that. It was late afternoon on a Thursday. The floor was busy but not packed. I'd been sitting with my coffee and notebook watching the same corner of the cage for 40 minutes, waiting for a gap in attention that felt big enough. I saw it when the shift supervisor got a phone call. He stepped out of the cage, gesturing with his free hand, voice tense. One cashier turned to ask him a question, leaving the other alone staring at his screen. 3 racks of trays sat behind them. One of the chip runners came in, parked his cart halfway through the half door, set a tray of red $5 chips on the top rack, then stepped away to sign a form at the counter. For exactly 5 seconds, no one had their eyes on the trays. I stood up, walked casually past the cage, as if heading to the bathrooms beyond. As I passed the half door, I let my jacket sleeve brush the edge of the rack. The tray was stacked high and neat. On the very corner, one $25 green chip teetered on top of a column slightly shorter than the others. My sleeve knocked it. It toppled to the floor. I stopped. "Oh, sorry," I said, bending with a grunt to pick it up. "Got it," I added, loud enough to be heard. The chip was warm from the casino lights, smooth from hands and felt. I had handled casino chips before, at the occasional blackjack table, back when Maria was still alive, and we'd sneak in $20 each for a silly date night. I had never put one in my pocket that didn't belong to me. My fingers closed around it. I straightened. No one was looking. The chip runner still signed. The cashier still typed. The supervisor still argued on the phone. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. The same length of pause I used to feel in the classroom when a student teetered between 2 answers on a test. One right, one wrong. Then I slid the chip into my jacket pocket, muttered, "Must have rolled," and kept walking. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and sat on the closed lid, heart pounding. It was only $25. Objectively, a tiny amount in a building where games turned over tens of thousands every hour. To me, it felt like I'd just thrown a brick through a bank window. I stayed there until my pulse slowed. When I came out, I washed my hands, looked at myself in the mirror. "Stupid old man," I told my reflection. "What are you doing?" I should have put the chip back. I should have walked to a table, tossed it down, lost it on one spin of the wheel, called it a one-time lapse. Instead, I walked out of the casino, got in my car, and drove home with that small green circle burning a hole in my pocket. The next morning, I brought the notebook. I sat in my usual spot. I watched the same area where I'd knocked the chip. I scrutinized every move the employees made. No one looked panicked. No one looked like they were hunting for a missing 25. They weighed trays, logged numbers, moved on. When I looked closely, I saw why. The tray from the day before had been logged as a full, even number that aligned with the rounded total the system expected. I knew, from watching and counting, that it had in fact held a couple of fractional chips worth of extra weight due to worn edges and mixed denominations. The software penciled those fractions into the void called rounding, called it square, and went on. My $25 theft had vanished into that void too. The numbers still matched. The system believed the tray was full. The employees trusted the system. I sat very still. Every logical, sensible, normal part of my brain screamed that I should stop right there. I had tested a theory and proven it. I had also committed a crime. I could walk away, chalk this up to a momentary moral collapse, slip the chip into a charity collection bin, and spend the rest of my days grading crosswords instead of ethics. But another part of my brain, the one that lit up when a clever student asked, "What would happen if we changed the rules?" whispered something else. What if this was the answer key? What if this was the one unfair test where I had the correction and the school refused to acknowledge the error? I remembered the breakfast receipt. The manager's, "It's what the system says." I remembered decades of watching bureaucracy shrug at truly harmful mistakes while punishing trivial ones. I remembered Maria lying in that hospital bed, the bills stacked on the kitchen table, the insurance paperwork so convoluted even I had to read it 3 times. The casino thought I was harmless. The system thought it was infallible. For the first time in 72 years, I saw a way to flip the test paper over. Walter Brand, the teacher, died sometime in the following weeks. He didn't die all at once. Parts of him lingered. The habit of checking the time, the compulsive need to balance his checkbook to the penny, the reflexive urge to correct a waiter's math if the bill was off. But the version of me who believed in playing by the rules, in trusting that the big systems would ultimately course correct if people like me just kept pointing out the errors, that man withered every time I watched a rounding discrepancy vanish while the casino hummed, oblivious. I didn't become a criminal mastermind overnight. I became methodical. I set rules for myself. If I was going to steal, and I started using that verb in my own head, because anything else would have been cowardice, then I would do it the way I had done everything else in my life, carefully, incrementally, with as much control as I could. Maintain. Rule 1. Never take more than I knew the rounding could hide in that specific context. I studied the scales. I saw that they tolerated certain variances before flagging a discrepancy. If a tray's expected weight was, say, 2,000 chips, and the scale read 1999.25, the system still said 2,000. That meant I could, in theory, remove up to 3 or 4 chips from that tray without triggering an alarm. But I never took that many. I took 1, sometimes 2. Rule 2, never take from the same tray twice. Once I'd stolen from a particular rack at a particular time, I'd mark it in my notebook and avoid it for weeks. Rule 3, vary everything. Days, hours, chip colors, locations. I started visiting partner casinos owned by the same parent company. Same software, same rounding flaw, slightly different floor plans. I walked in as the same polite old man with a loyalty card and a $10 breakfast habit. I tipped dealers when I sat at low-stakes blackjack for an hour, using small bills, never drawing attention. I learned where their cages sat, where their temporary racks were, which employees were too overworked or undertrained to notice a single chip hitting the carpet. I didn't get greedy, not at first. The first month, my take was less than $5,000. More money than I'd ever stolen in my life. Less than some rich fool dropped in one night at the high roller tables. Nobody noticed. The system stayed perfect. My notebook began to fill with more than observations. It became a syllabus. I didn't just stuff chips into my pocket and walk to the cage like an idiot. Even in my arrogance, I knew better. Casinos have cameras everywhere. They know who cashes out what, when, and where. So I turned my thefts into a slow drip instead of a flood. I never cashed the chips where I took them. If I slid a single green chip off a rack in Casino A, I'd pocket it, leave, and cash it as part of a small stack in Casino B 3 days later, sitting at a blackjack table for an hour first so I had a plausible source. I kept stakes low. Mid-value chips mostly. Greens 25 and blacks 100. Occasionally a purple 500 if the rounding errors on a particularly messy tray gave me room and my nerve held. Never the orange-brown $1,000 chips. Never the high-denomination plaques reserved for serious whales. Those got audited more intensely. I never took more than $3,000 worth per day. Most days it was 800, 1,000, 1,500. Over the course of a year, those numbers start to look different. 21,000, 88,000, 310,000. The first time my notebook's running total passed $1 million, I closed it, put it in the drawer, and sat in the dark for an hour, listening to my own breath. Stop, I told myself. You have enough, I told myself. Who are you, I asked myself, if you keep going? The answer scared me, so I changed the question. Who are they, I thought instead. What are they that they can lose this much to a rounding error and never care? I had spent my life fighting with administrators over tiny budget mistakes. $50 here, $100 there. While the district lost thousands in miscellaneous adjustments they refused to track. Now I was the adjustment, the ghost in the ledger, and it felt intoxicating. If you asked anyone working at the casino about me during those months, they'd probably say something like this. Oh, Walter. Yeah, I remember him. Sweet old guy. Math teacher, I think. Always had a notebook. Kind of weird, but harmless. Tipped okay. I cultivated that harmlessness like a garden. I never complained loudly. Never made a scene. Never drank on the floor. Never flirted clumsily with the staff like some widowers did, thinking their age gave them license to be gross. I was polite, presentable, predictable. I asked the dealers how their day was going. I sympathized when a young cashier complained about long hours. I tutored the bartender's kid in algebra once, in exchange for nothing more than a thank you and a slightly stronger cup of coffee the next morning. I was the old man people forgot 5 minutes after he walked away. Meanwhile, my notebook filled with coded records. G24, T14, 1G might mean green rack 2, fourth tray, tray 14, removed 1 green chip. If someone had ever found that notebook, they might have thought it was some senile man's doodles. In reality, it was my audit trail. I wasn't doing it out of guilt. I was doing it because I couldn't stop being a teacher, even to myself. If I was going to cheat, I wanted a record of how I'd constructed the cheat. Some dark part of me imagined some future student reading it as a case study in system failure. The first plot twist, the one I didn't see coming, didn't arrive in the form of security knocking on my door. It arrived as an article in a local business journal I almost threw away without reading. Regional Casino Group undergoes external audit, the headline said. Boring, until I saw the byline. Audit led by Laura Chen, CPA, forensic accounting specialist. Forensic. Now there was a word that made my stomach clench. I read the article. Most of it was fluff. Quotes from executives about commitment to transparency. Some numbers about quarterly earnings, vague mentions of changing regulatory environments. Buried in the middle was the part that made my pulse quicken. Review of legacy accounting systems, chip inventory reconciliation, and variance reporting. Variance, chip inventory. Those were my playground. I folded the paper, put it aside, and tried to tell myself it was nothing. Casinos did audits all the time. Most of them were box-checking exercises. As long as the big numbers balanced, no one squinted too hard at the decimals. Then over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes on the floor. The chip runners looked tenser. The cashiers double-checked their entries more often. Supervisors took more trays back to the back room for manual verification. The temporary racks behind the cage weren't as unattended as before. Someone always seemed to stand near them now, clipboard in hand. I tightened my rules, cut my extractions in half. Some days I didn't take anything at all. Just watched, counted, updated my notebook with notes like new procedure, second count, and additional sign-off. Meanwhile, my off-the-books total kept ticking up. 9.4 million, 18, 33. Once you cross a line like that, the numbers stop feeling real. In the classroom, I used to write 57,800,000 on the board when we did probability problems. If the jackpot is 57.8 million, I'd say, and your chances of winning are 1 in 292 million, the kids would whistle, laugh, daydream. To me, it had been an unlived abstraction. Until my little columns of mid-value chips, aggregated over 11 months, reached it. I didn't know the exact moment it happened. I wasn't counting with that goal in mind. One night, sitting at my kitchen table with a notebook, a calculator, and a cautious glass of whiskey, I added up the running totals and realized what I'd done. $57,800,000. Not in one place, not in one account, spread across safety deposit boxes, mutual funds opened quietly under my own name and under a family trust, seeded carefully so as not to trigger automatic suspicious activity thresholds. Certificates of deposit. A couple of small rental properties bought in cash, entitled in an LLC. If anyone asked, I'd say I'd inherited it. No one did. Why would they? I was just Walter. Widower. Retired teacher. Quiet old man with a notebook. A ghost. The second plot twist came from an angle I should have predicted, because it came from someone like me. Her name was Maria Gonzalez. I didn't know that at the time, of course. I learned it later when my little private heist became a file in someone else's office. She was 32, a forensic auditor, and unlike the internal staff who had grown used to the casino's way of doing things, she came in with fresh eyes and no loyalties. She did what I used to beg my students to do. She questioned the answer key. From what I pieced together later, based on the news and rumors that trickled back to me, it went something like this. She sat in a back office for days, combing through variance reports. She saw the same thing I had seen from the outside. Too many clean logs. Casinos are messy places. Chips get dropped, miscounted, swapped. People are tired. Numbers go wrong. A certain level of noise, of variance is expected. Here, the legacy system reports were almost eerily perfect. Perfect totals, perfect logs, perfect reconciliations. Except for a small but persistent category labeled rounding adjustment. To most accountants, that would be as boring as it sounded. To Maria, it was a red pen waiting to be uncapped. She traced those adjustments back, saw how the software took fractional chip values and folded them into the nearest hole, saw how often they skewed downward, saw how, on busy days, certain racks and trays got counted, rounded, recounted, rounded, until the gap between physical chips and digital chips became a small, gray cloud of uncertainty. Individually, the errors were tiny. Collectively, they were a river. Someone, she realized, could swim in that river without leaving ripples. She pulled surveillance from random days, then not so random ones. She noticed a pattern, slight inventory shrinkage that didn't match known causes, happening at times when logs were perfect on paper. That's the paradox even my laziest students learned. Perfection in a noisy system is suspicious. She watched hours of footage at 3 times speed, chips flowing in and out, employees trudging, customers laughing, winning, losing, and here and there a small, bent old man in a sweater vest, sitting near the cage with a notebook, walking slowly past the temporary racks, bending to pick up a dropped chip. Smiling politely at the cameras, he pretended not to notice. The day they approached me, I knew before they even opened their mouths. I don't believe in premonitions. I believe in cues, empirical ones. The cage had a different energy that morning. The staff were too stiff. One cashier kept glancing at the back office. The chip runners were quieter. And there was a man in a suit at the edge of the pit, wearing a name tag that only people from corporate wore. I drank my coffee, opened my notebook, pretended to doodle, waited. It didn't take long. 2 men and a woman approached my table. Not security in uniforms. Higher up the food chain. Badges that meant, we have authority, but we're pretending this is friendly. Mr. Brand? The woman asked. She was younger than I expected. Dark hair pulled back. Sharp eyes. The kind of binder under her arm I'd carried my whole life. Yeah, I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin. Can I help you? My name is Maria Gonzalez, she said. This is David. This is Tom. We're part of the audit team working with the casino. Could we speak with you privately for a few minutes? I looked at the notebook, closed it, slipped the pen into my pocket. Of course, I said. Is there a problem with my breakfast discount again? No one laughed. They led me to a small conference room off the casino floor. For a moment, it felt like being called into the principal's office. Except this time, I was the student. Maria sat across from me, placed her binder on the table, opened it. Mr. Brand, she began, how often would you say you visit this casino? I shrugged. Most morning, I said. I like the coffee, the people watching. Do you gamble? She asked. Sometimes, I said. Penny slots. The occasional blackjack hand if I'm feeling wild. You've also visited some of our partner properties, she said. In Henderson, in Albuquerque, in Laughlin. Is that not allowed? I asked mildly. Your commercials say I can play and stay across the region. It's allowed, she said. We encourage it. She slid a page across the table. It showed a list of dates, times, locations, my players' club activity. On these dates, she said, tapping, you also cashed out chips. Not huge amounts. 200 here, 400 there, 1,100 on this date, 3,500 on another. Nothing individually remarkable, but when you add them up, she slid another page, a total at the bottom. I didn't flinch. Inside, my heart drummed against my ribs. Outside, I was the same old man who had stared down classrooms full of smirking teenagers and refused to blink. That's over 11 months, I said, and I've been playing longer than that. Is there a minimum I'm supposed to lose to make you happy? David, the man to her left, shifted, but Maria held up a small hand. No one is accusing you of anything yet, Mr. Brand, she said. We're just trying to reconcile some discrepancies in our chip inventory, and your play pattern intersects with those windows. Discrepancies, I repeated. In a casino. I'm shocked. She allowed herself a ghost of a smile. True, she said, but these aren't your usual kind of discrepancies. They're neat, too neat, and you, of all people, know what perfect scores in messy systems look like. I met her gaze. You did your homework, I said. We have your employment history, she said. 41 years teaching math, algebra, probability. You live on a fixed pension. You don't have any obvious alternative income. And yet, she slid another sheet. Bank records. She hadn't gotten everything, thank God. I'd used enough small banks and paper instruments to keep most of it off easy radar, but she had one savings account, one I'd been lazy about. It had an extra $280,000 in it since last year, enough to raise eyebrows. An inheritance, I said calmly. My wife's side of the family. Her brother died, no kids. Left us something we didn't expect. I can give you the lawyer's name. That part was even partially true. Her brother had died years earlier and left us a small sum. Nowhere near what sat in that account. But the paperwork existed. The story had a spine. Maria glanced at David. He wrote something down. Mr. Brand, she said gently, our job is not to pry into your personal finances. Our job is to ensure the integrity of the casino systems. Then I'd suggest you look at your systems, I said. They're rounding down more than they should. You're losing small amounts every day and writing them off as rounding. You don't need to audit me to blame your calculator. Her eyes sharpened for a flash. You noticed that, she said. I noticed breakfast being 6 cents off, I replied. Everything after that was obvious. Obvious, David repeated skeptically. To someone who's counted more failed tests than you've had hot meals, I said. I shouldn't have antagonized them. Old habits. Maria steepled her fingers. Mr. Brand, she said, have you ever taken chips that were not yours from the casino floor? The room was suddenly very quiet. No machines, no clatter. Just the hum of the air conditioning and my own pulse in my ears. There it was. The question. Not about systems, about me. I thought about lying, flat out. No, I could say, eyes wide, hands trembling, play the offended innocent. But lying well requires energy I didn't have. So I split the hair teachers know how to split. I have picked up chips that other people knocked off tables, I said. I've handed them back to dealers. I've seen chips on the floor under machines. I've pointed them out. If you have footage that says otherwise, I'd be curious to see it. She studied me. We do have footage, she said. Lots of it. You picking up chips near racks, near carts, near tables. Like any other observant guest, I said. If I wanted to steal from you, Ms. Gonzalez, I'd like to think I'd be slightly less clumsy. Tom, the third man, snorted before he could stop himself. Maria didn't smile. If you did, she said quietly, then I will say this. You found a flaw that should never have existed, and that is on us. We are fixing it. Effective next week, the rounding algorithm is being patched. Manual counts will be mandatory at more intervals. Those temporary racks you like so much, they'll be gone. She paused. Whatever you did or did not do in the past, she added, will become much harder for anyone else to attempt. You're welcome, I said dryly. She looked almost sad. I became an auditor because I hated people getting away with manipulating numbers, she said. I liked catching errors, like you did. In a way, we're on the same side. We're not on the same side, I said. I spent my life making sure kids didn't fail math so they could go out and get chewed up by systems like this. You get paid to plug leaks for the house. Different kind of moral equation. Maybe, she said, but we still have to solve for X. Right now, you're part of that equation. She closed the binder. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Brand, she said. You are not being arrested today. We don't have enough to charge you with a crime. We can prove that our systems had a flaw. We can prove that someone exploited it. We can show that your presence correlates with certain losses. Correlation is not causation. A jury would see an old man with shaky hands and think we're bullies. She looked at the men beside her. However, she continued, the casino has the right to refuse service to anyone. Effective immediately, you are banned from this property and all partner properties. If you return, you will be trespassing. If you attempt to cash chips here in the future, we will consider that an additional offense. Do you understand? There it was. Exile, not prison, not handcuffs, just a door closing with a soft bureaucratic click. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I understand, I said. We will also be monitoring your known financial accounts, she added. If something egregious appears, large unexplained transfers, patterns consistent with money laundering, we will refer it to the authorities. I recommend you keep things boring. Boring is my specialty, I said. She nodded once. Do you have any questions for us? She asked. Just one, I said. How long did it take you to find the rounding error? A week, she said. 2, to be sure. It was elegant in its way. I almost admired whoever saw it. Our eyes met. For a moment, I felt something like the camaraderie I used to feel with the one student in class who loved the material as much as I did. If it makes you feel any better, I said, I didn't do it fast either. It doesn't, she replied. But thank you for your honesty. She stood. So that's it? I asked. I just walk out? That's it, she said. Security will escort you off the premises. Please don't come back. I stood slowly, my knees protesting. At the door I turned. You'll fix it, I said. The flaw, I clarified. You'll fix it violently, overcorrect. Someone like me won't be able to do this again. Yes, she said, we will. Good, Ram, I said. Make them earn their money. I walked out. 2 security guards flanked me as we crossed the casino floor. No one stared. No one pointed. I was just another old man leaving with his coffee cup and his notebook. Harmless, invisible, which of course was the reason I'd gotten away with it in the first place. Casino people are superstitious. They believe in luck and energy and streaks. They talk about the universe in the same breath as probability. So of course, rumors about me spread in that language. They couldn't call what I did theft, not officially, not without indicting themselves, so they called it something else. Did you hear about the retired teacher? A dealer in Laughlin might whisper to a waitress on break. Guy who saw through the chip system, took him for 50 million or 60. Depends who you ask. I heard he hacked the mainframe, a pit boss might say. I heard he had a photographic memory, another would add. I heard he's in jail in Reno, someone else would say. I heard he bought a villa in Spain. I heard he never left town, just changed his name. My favorite version, the one I overheard accidentally months later in a grocery store, came from a former student I recognized by his tattoo before his face. Some old dude, he told his friend in the cereal aisle. Math teacher, I think. Caught a mistake in the casino's rounding program and just wrote it. Like, for months. They called him the Count. The Count. I almost choked on my own laughter. If only my students had given me such a nickname when I'd been grading their quizzes instead of their parents' retirement plans. The truth was less glamorous. No jail, no extradition, no villa. Just me in a modest apartment, my pensions supplemented by investments that, on paper, came from inheritances and savings and lucky streaks, carefully structured by a financial advisor who had no idea where the seed money had originated. I did move eventually, not to Spain, to a small coastal town 3 states away, population 8,000, one grocery store, no casino within 100 miles. I bought a little house with peeling paint and a view of the pier. I fed birds from the railing in the mornings. I tutored neighborhood kids in algebra in the afternoons. Not because I needed the money, but because I didn't know who I was without equations and pencil marks. I never set foot on a casino floor again. I never touched a chip. Sometimes when the fog rolled in and the pier lights blinked through it in little halos, I would take out my old notebook. Not the one with the chip codes. I burned that the night after the meeting with Maria, watching the pages curl and blacken in the sink, feeling like I was erasing a textbook I'd written myself. The other notebook, the one with lesson plans, probability games, coin toss experiments, questions like, if the jackpot is 50/70 and now is $800,000 and your chances of winning are, I would look at that number on the page and feel 2 things at once. The old teacher's irritation at how willingly people threw away money chasing a dream mathematically, engineered to elude them. And the new man's quiet, guilty satisfaction at having taken that same amount from a system that was never supposed to lose it to someone like me. If the casino executives ever thought about me, it was probably with irritation, maybe grudging respect. If Maria ever thought about me, I imagine it was as a footnote in a report, a case study she brought up when training new auditors. Don't ignore the little rounding errors, she might say. They're where the clever ones live. As for me, I thought about her more than I expected. Not with anger, with something closer to professional appreciation. She had done what I'd loved doing. She found the mistake no one else wanted to admit was there. She corrected their math. She closed the loophole I had slipped through. She made sure the next Walter Brand who wandered a casino floor with sharp eyes and too much time on his hands would find nothing but noise where I had found signal. I stole $57,800,000. Not in a single heist. Not with a gun. Not with a piece of malicious code buried in a server. I stole it the way I had spent my life giving partial credit. 1 point here, 1 point there, all by watching the margins. In the end, I didn't beat the casino with luck. I beat it with the oldest tool I had, a red pen circling a tiny error